It may not look like it, but these two men are making a newspaper. Not an ordinary newspaper, to be sure. In fact, it's probably the most unusual daily newspaper in the world, and certainly the only one where the front page is nailed to a tree. It's happening in a town called Mualbual in the Philippines. This board joins 24 others scattered around the town. Together, they make up a unique experiment in communication, which goes under the proud banner of the Mualbual Times. This is a newspaper where the readers themselves contribute many of the items. It's their journal, and it covers events in their community with a speed and relevance no ordinary daily could hope to match. And while printed newspapers are expensive in areas like this, the Mualbual Times is absolutely free. Mualbual's too small to be on most maps. It's on the west coast of the island province of Cebu in central Philippines. As a coastal area, it depends a good deal on the sea for its livelihood. Fortunately, the fishing's good, and so is the climate. Life isn't easy, but it's not too difficult to get enough to eat. In money terms, though, the people are poor. According to official figures, Mualbual has 13,000 inhabitants, but the local estimate is more like 18,000. But most people live in small villages scattered over a fairly wide area, so it's still a very rural community. Those who don't fish work on the land. Most of them own land, so there's relatively little difference between the richest and the poorest of them. Seen from a distance, the town itself seems lost among the trees. Only one landmark stands out, but that's an important one. The Catholic Church is at the very center of life in Mualbual, and at the center of church life is the parish priest, Father Francisco Silva. Father Silva's the editor of the Blackboard newspaper. It was he who created it shortly after his arrival here 7 years ago, and he's been the driving force behind it ever since. No editor was ever closer to his readers. Every day after service, his parishioners gather round to give him the local news and views which form the basis of the Mualbual Times. News from further afield comes with the printed newspaper, delivered daily by messenger from Cebu City, 90 kilometers away. Father Silva's secretary takes the paper and scans it for possible stories. The actual selection is usually made by the editor himself, although there's a 13-man editorial board which meets regularly to discuss the paper's contents. A typical news break. A woman from a neighboring island, Mrs. Relosa Tejedor, reports the loss of a pig. Father Silva listens sympathetically and arranges for the loss to be published within hours. Another source of news is the radio. This is the midday news from the Cebu City radio station, broadcasting in the local dialect. The main item's about a plane crash in Manila, but the story Father Silva goes for concerns the latest Red Cross campaign. Apart from being priest and editor, Father Silva is also principal of the local high school, which is conveniently situated next to his office. The children's lessons aren't restricted to the academic subjects of the classroom. Father Silver lays equal stress on involving them as members of the community. Every day, there's a schoolyard session that begins with a sing-song. Discussion time. The children split up into small groups to comment on something they've seen on the news boards. This time it's the story of a woman who lost her purse with 95 pesos in it. Several hours later, it was found and returned to her.
Venancio is a man who is worthy to be praised.
The group leaders are unanimous in praising the honesty of the finder. The same system produces rapid agreement on a wide range of topics, including the school rules. In the classroom, the children's involvement with the Blackboard newspaper goes even deeper. Every afternoon, when lessons have ended, special groups of children take down the news that will appear in the next day's paper. They're what Father Silver calls his blue dozen, from the colour of their berets. Girls, too, are part of the system. From the school, messengers take the news items to teachers who live in the town but work in the barrios, the outlying villages. The following morning, the teachers, all on motorcycles, carry the news to their respective schools, where it's put on the local news board. But all these local boards are simply smaller editions of the main board in the town itself. The writing is done by the Blue Dozen, and being allowed to chalk up the big board is a special honour that's coveted by every boy in town. The main board carries more items than the local ones and gives more details of the event. This one tells the story of Mrs. Tejedor's pig and reports that the animal has already been recovered. One corner's given over to a cartoon, which invariably gets a laugh. The audience includes market traders who are themselves important sources of news items for the boards. Another story tells how 4 schools are cooperating in a road building scheme. It explains the roads were damaged by typhoons and the staff and pupils decided to repair them as part of a community action program. The story is of particular interest to Sanzo de Musmog, a fisherman who's been hampered by the bad roads in getting his fish to market. This is what the locals call pulong pulong, or discussion. It's the written equivalent of Father Silver's schoolyard sessions, and this one's on the same subject of the recovered purse. Harder news comes in the story of Father Louis Halandoni, a priest from a neighbouring island who's been charged with armed rebellion and held in Manila. Father Silver always reports on government activity, but takes care to steer clear of propaganda. Like many Filipinos, the people of Mualboal are keen chess players, so a story about Bobby Fischer goes down well. Especially this one, which tells how the world champion wants to meet his Russian challenger in Manila. Betty Mendoza's 35 and a housewife. She's a keen chess fan, and she hopes Fisher will come to Manila. Yoli Alivares, a pedicab driver, is more interested in the road repairs, since it will mean less damage to his cab. Out of town, Nolan Goneg, a 14-year-old schoolboy, gets news of the same stories from his local board. He copies down the details in order to take them home to his parents. If a parent can't read, the child reads for them. In fact, literacy is high in the Philippines, over 80%, and many parents make a point of reading the news simply because their own child brings it. We spoke to Father Silva about the paper and why he'd started it in the first place.
It seems there is a need for our people to know what's going on in our country and around the world, in our province as well as in the town itself. In the various surveys made, national as well as local, what came out was this: the main problem of our country is educational. There is a need to educate our people along various aspects of life. In a democracy like ours, we need a people who are alert, who know what's going on, to be able to come up with the right decisions. In my town, for instance, Mualboal, our people have very little means of knowing what's going on. Newspapers, the national as well as the provincial papers, don't reach us here. Certainly we have the radios, but then our radios talk mostly about, give out mostly programs, dramas, which have nothing to do with the development of our people. So as a new parish priest, 7 years ago, when I was assigned here, I also felt the need. I saw the need of our people. And so I have to come up with something that would meet this need of education, sort of curing the ignorance of our people. Now, we could not afford to print a newspaper. It's costly. We started with a mimeograph weekly. But even then, we could not afford to maintain it. And so, gathering my people and thinking of ways and means how to come up with the written word, we thought of the blackboards, which would serve as a daily newspaper in Mualboal. That is how the Mualboal Times was born.
There's no doubt about the paper's success. In the municipal offices, the local mayor now uses it to announce all city ordinances. And anyone who wants to announce a birth, marriage or death simply puts it on the board. It's been particularly useful for the local peasants, especially those growing copra, as it carries the latest market prices for the commodity and thus prevents swindling by unscrupulous middlemen. The villagers still tell the story of how 3 gangsters came from Cebu to start a protection racket in Mualboal. Their names were put on the boards, and the people were told to follow them wherever they went. They didn't do anything or say anything. They simply stared. After 2 days, the gangsters could stand it no longer and went back to the city.